Welcome to Legal Soundings, the podcast from Harbor, where leaders from across the legal ecosystem chart the course for the business of law. Whether you're navigating change inside a law firm, leading legal operations in-house, or building the next generation of legal technology, Legal Soundings is where insight meets action.
Greetings, everybody. I am super excited to be able to facilitate a conversation today with two of my favorite people in the industry, Zena Applebaum and Rachel Shield Williams, to talk about one of our favorite topics in the industry, the top 5 data trends for law firms in 2026. So today we're talking about the top 5 data trends for 26 that will drive firm growth as well as improve a firm's market position and differentiation. So laying out those top 5, and then we'll dig into each of these individually. But the first one being fragmented relationships and experience data. So it sounds like that was an impetus for both of you as it relates to, to turning into data geeks. The second one being poor data quality and incomplete data. The third being turning data into actionable revenue insights, not just reports, but revenue insights to drive growth. The fourth being governance, privacy, and AI and data ethics. And then the last one always gets down to the human element, change management and cultural adoption of data-driven business development. So let's jump into the first one, fragmented relationships and experience data. The challenge that we're seeing there is that client contact and experience data is scattered across numerous sources within any of your typical firms, be it CRM, time and billing, your document management system, email, events, spreadsheets, pitch systems, and now AI copilots. The fragmentation is really prohibiting a 360-degree client view, experience lookups, and meaningful business development analytics that drive identifying opportunities, not just pursuing known opportunities. So why does this matter in 2026?
Well, I think it matters because we have to drive revenue. Our firms want to be able to grow. And driving revenue isn't just about, oh, here's a new client to pitch. It's what relationships are we protecting? How are we protecting the client the way the client wants to be protected? Are we deepening those relationships? Are we understanding the depth of it? It's not just the lawyer telling us like, well, I talk to the client all the time. Maybe they're only talking to one person at the client, and what happens if that one person leaves? What if that person retires? Understanding the complexity of the relationships in the same way that, when people are selling to a law firm, they want to have an enterprise sales relationship. We need to have that same type of relationship with our clients where our lawyers have multiple relationships and we have multiple lawyers with multiple relationships within the clients, and being able to leverage that and making sure that we're communicating and relating with our clients the way that they want to be related to, not the way that we think they should be related to. But also on the flip side is making sure that we're leveraging all the knowledge and information across our organizations. As our firms continue to grow and merge and organizations keep on getting bigger, we need to connect these different systems because the information, like if you're looking for a knowledge work product, and you have a long-term client, maybe you're looking for that work product when the company was private. But now if you look at the company in your CRM, the company joined when they were private, but now they're public. So in the CRM, they come across as a public company, but you're actually looking for a work product element from when they were a private company. So you need to be able to show the lineage of the company's structure and be able to look for documents at a certain period of time to find that work product. So there's a lot of complexity in why we want to relate. We want to be able to see the full history of a client and the relationship and how we look at them for a variety of different business reasons to help us work more effectively and more efficiently.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you're highlighting, Rachel, is this idea in law firms that we all know what we each know. And particularly for those of us that were in what I would call the allied professional part of the law firm, so non-billable time. there's an expectation that if an attorney speaks to one of us, they've spoken to all of us, and we all know what we each know. And they shouldn't have to repeat themselves. So if something is in a chamber submission that was done 2 weeks ago, the expectation is you're not going to come back to them and ask them about that again. Or they've filled out a form to have their experience captured in Foundation or whatever experience management tool you're using, and you're not going to come back to them again to get extra details from them. So the idea is that we all know what we each know. The reality is we don't do a good enough job of connecting those dots internally, but we shouldn't have to in today's day, in 2026, for example, if we could overlay some kind of tool, whether Gen AI or otherwise, that would help us pull all of this data together. But to do that, you not only need really strong tools, you need the data underlying those tools to be complete, to have data integrity. And you really need, and I'm going to say this, and I know Rachel's going to jump all over it, you really need a single system of truth. Mm-hmm. And you need everyone in the firm to agree on what and where not only that single source of truth is, so like you can agree on the system, you also have to agree on the maintenance schedule, the responsibility, the accountability, and so on and so forth. So I think when you think about fragmented relationship with data and experience data, there is this notion of cross-functional data, but there is a process element of the single source of truth, and then the people element too, which can be even more challenging.
Well, and Zena, I think you're touching on one of my favorite topics that also gets people really kind of either very excited or very upset. And it's governance, and that's what you're describing here. I like to refer to it as data enablement because it feels a little bit more positive, which is a little bit more on brand for me. But the idea that in order for us to enable this information, for it to have a single source of truth and for it to be able to go across multiple systems, we have to have a series of rules in place about this is what the system of truth is, and this is what this field means. It's not to say that we can't have other fields. Like a great example, I'll go back to the company entity structure. It's not to say that we can't say when a client joins at the time of relationship inception, entity structure, current entity structure, entity structure change point. Like you can build those fields in, but you need to have a conversation, and also you need to understand the business reason of why you're creating those fields. You can't just create a field because we might need it. That creates clutter, that creates stress. We'll talk more about change management, but if people are freaked out by it, they're not going to go to it. But if you can say, we have this field here because, and here's the business case, and here's the story, and here's the reasons that this exists, then we can take people on the journey with us.
I think the business case and the business reason are two, they're the same thing, but I think that it's a mindset shift away from, I do this transactional work, whether it's actually transactional or litigation. It's not time bound. You're talking about the relationship, and all of that is actually the law firm's currency. It's how they get more work. Mm-hmm. And I think lawyers are not trained necessarily. I think it's changing, but traditionally they're not trained to think of the work that they do or the experience that they have as a compelling competitive advantage. And so they don't document it, or they don't know why we would want to document it, or they don't know why we would want to document every little piece of it, because they're not on the receiving end of the calls that say, what work have we done in this industry for this type of client, for this size firm, in this geography. But we get those calls all the time.
And a consistent expectation from law departments is know me, know my industry and what's happening in it. And you better show up better than your competition to demonstrate that.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And, Zena, you touched on another really important topic, and it's the training. And that goes back to change management. When we can't tackle the culture change of just data, we have to tie it back to the what's in it for me. We have to tie it back to this data facilitates relationship development. And that in turn facilitates revenue, which facilitates growth. So we can't work in silos the same way that our data can't operate in these fractional silos, nor can we think about training for these things, nor can we need to help people understand how all these pieces are connected.
There's a great statistic that a good friend of mine, Dr. Craig Fleischer in the intelligence world, would share, that it takes 7 years for people to build trust. So when you think about the traveling that you do, and you think about the fact that most of our tenures, like we move around, like that's sort of the nature of jobs today, whether we move around within the same organization or in other organizations, if it takes 7 years to build trust, getting out and talking to people is one of the ways that you can shorten that time horizon, hopefully, and like talk to people face to face. But we don't often have 7 years to get the data right. We certainly are not going to have 7 years in 2026 to build enough trust and have strong relationships such that we can then take advantage of AI at the rapid pace that AI is growing and changing this industry. We need to move a little bit quicker. So building those relationships and engendering that trust is super important to sort of closing the fragmentation of data, both relationship data and experience data.
And from a change management and cultural perspective, what do you think that means for the evolution of business development and business development roles at law firms? Do you think that having data and having that information available changes the dynamics of how business development professionals interact with clients?
I think to an extent, I think marketing and business development professionals have always been the storytellers and telling the story of how these pieces have come together. I think they've been natural change agents of getting lawyers to do things differently. If you think about it, like who actually persuaded lawyers to add contacts to the CRM? Who convinced the lawyers to, participate in the chamber's submissions? Who convinced them to move to the e-holiday card? Who convinced them to do these different things? And it was through storytelling and talking about the importance of the relationship. Who brought the voice of the client into the process of putting together the pitch, or the voice of the client when you're in those reverse auction rooms? It's the business development professional. So if anything, I think it's going to give them more tools to tell those stories and to be more persuasive.
And I think the more that business development professionals can rely on irrefutable data to help tell the stories, as Rachel says, the more likely the lawyers are to start trusting them without verifying everything they say, such that they can move faster and be smarter about the way in which they go about having those relationships and deepen them to create more opportunities for their firms and ultimately more revenue down the line.
Let's talk about what it takes for data to be irrefutable, which takes us to, I think, the vexing challenge that most firms are dealing with, which is poor data quality and incomplete data. CRM and marketing databases are full of duplicates, bad email addresses, outdated roles, orphan contacts. There is a whole cottage industry, as a matter of fact, that Harbor is a part of, around data quality services. And that really seems to be the area that firms are really focused on in turning bad data into irrefutable data. So we've talked a little bit about why that's important, but what guidance would you provide to those that are listening around actions to take around solving for data quality and incomplete data challenges?
So I'll touch on this a little bit from the perspective of AI. I think one of the things that freaked people out in the early days of generative AI, by the way, I'm talking like 2.5 years ago, like it's not like this was 20 years ago. The early days of generative AI was
time warp.
Yeah, right. Was hallucinations, and everybody's worried about hallucinations. Well, one of the ways in which you can limit hallucinations is by making sure that you have really up-to-date data that has been cleaned, that has been scrubbed, that is verifiable, and point your AI specifically at only that data, and you're less likely to get hallucinations. So it is like a risk mitigation factor. It's not like we're cleaning data for the sake of cleaning data. It's actually going to help minimize hallucinations, particularly in a RAG environment. If you have your AI positioned in such a way, whether it's a proprietary AI model that you're using, or you're using one of the existing models, but only pointing it at specific data, the cleaner it is, the less likely you are to have hallucinations, and the less likely you are for the AI to retrieve something bad or awkward. That's one thing. The other thing is, lawyers by their nature, and you can read The Lawyer Brain as an example, but lawyers by their nature appreciate the aesthetic and they don't like to be wrong. And because they don't like to be wrong, we don't want to put them in a position where they are wrong. So you want to make sure that you are cleaning your data and keeping it clean to avoid, I mean, it's part of that risk mitigation strategy, but it's more than that. It's to save embarrassment in some respects. I know every firm I've ever worked for, and probably every firm that exists, has invited at least one dead person to an event over the course of the last 20 years. It just happens, right? Like CRMs don't get cleaned. Somebody doesn't tell somebody and things happen. And so you want to avoid that embarrassment, because those are the kinds of things that are actually going to stop lawyers from engaging.
And in the context of data for law firm growth, where should firms start as it relates to taking on data for that particular challenge?
So I would say the data that's related to your strategic priorities. If you take a look at your strategic plan and what your strategic goals are, and you read through them, there's probably anywhere from 5 to 10 common data elements across them. And that's where you start. So say the client industry shows up in 3 of your 5 strategic goals. So that's where you're going to start. And it's also something that is a data point that you can purchase. It's a third-party verifiable source. And then methodically move through that list. And as you're picking through those pieces, what are the rules? How are they set up? How are you going to standardize it? How are you going to clean it? How often are you going to check it? Is it something that's going to be an API that you bring in? Is it something that you're going to check every 6 months? Are you going to check it once a year for your top 500 clients? What are the rules and guidelines for each one of those data elements as you're going through and setting it up? And then once you get through that first 10, I'm confident people will come to you with more. If not, continue to work through it the same systematic way.
Yeah. You did a really nice transition there to data governance, data enablement, privacy and AI data ethics. So you want to double click on that a bit around why that's so important as you are prioritizing and tackling each of these prioritized data elements.
The world is a complex place, and different countries have different rules about how they want their information used, and how people have a right to have their information used and accessed. And we need to be able to be responsive to those different countries' rules and where people are. Just because one of your contacts is based in the US today doesn't mean that they're not going to move to the EU next year, and then all of their data will be protected under the EU rules. So maybe they can reach out and say, I actually want you to delete all of my data, or I want to know how all of my data is used. Mm-hmm. So we can't operate anymore in a world that like, oh, I'm in the US. Here are my US rules. We need to operate in a global mindset in terms of how our information is used to be prepared.
And it's not just about the data. Like, we need to train the people to collect the data in a way that makes sense across all of the various rules that exist. And those rules aren't always, I mean, there are things like GDPR and, APAC regimes and things like that. But there's also ethics that come into play that are that fine gray line between what's actually law, what's codified, and what's just like acceptable business practice. And what might be acceptable in one jurisdiction may not be acceptable in another jurisdiction. But I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of set the minimum standard in terms of data collection, in terms of data preservation, data sharing. So I think that's where governance comes in, but also privacy and data ethics around that too. And then, of course, there's the issue that only law firms have, around, well, maybe not only law firms, but around conflicts and making sure that data isn't shared inadvertently across the firm or within the same firm that shouldn't be shared because of ethical walls and conflicts.
Certainly, and risk and compliance has certainly elevated in recent years to be, a very high priority for C-suite leaders, and this is one area that is, creating some opportunity to round out the risk and compliance capabilities of the firm to protect data and to ensure compliance with those data requirements.
And also, to the idea that not everyone at the firm should have access to everything. Not every role needs to see every piece of information. I'm all about data transparency if it is the right thing for your role. And that's a part of building. That's why data governance is important. It's a part of building a culture of trust and transparency, that the right people can see the right information at the right time to do the right jobs.
And it's even as simple as the wrong person putting the wrong prompt into a public-facing generative AI service. And now that information is part of the global network of information in ChatGPT.
Some of my most amusing stories that I've heard over the last couple of years has been when people have turned on Copilot or AI tools, and all of a sudden things are coming up, and they're like, "Uh-oh, ruh-roh."
Yeah, right.
I didn't know it would read that. So let's turn our attention to the element around what it takes to turn data into actionable revenue insights, and not just canned reports.
My favorite part.
I know, right? So what does that take? And, obviously firms are sitting on mountains of matter data, pricing history, engagement info, but are struggling to really unify it and turn it into timely, actionable, signals for when clients are at risk, when and where cross-selling is possible, how to prioritize pitches, and what's happening in industries and which industries are emerging and present opportunities for the firm. So would love to get both of your thoughts on that, because that's really the linchpin, right, of turning data into growth for your firms.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about a lot of the different elements, because I think, it's a combination of taking internal and external data and marrying it together to get those insights. You're not going to extract those insights just from your internal information, nor are you going to get that from just looking at external information. It's pairing the two together. And to pair those two together, you need to have rules around how do you normalize it? What are you looking for? What are the elements that you're bringing in to identify those patterns and those opportunities that you're looking for? It can't be a scatter shot of like, well, we're going to dump it all in a lake house and we're just going to see what comes out. You need to have an idea of what you're looking for and how you're going to look for it, and what pieces you're going to take from where to put together to start looking for the story that you're looking to tell.
Yeah, and it's often a cross section of the BD data, the finance data. Mm-hmm. IT will sometimes have some of that data as well, like who's accessed your website and how often and that kind of thing. But I go back to, there has to be a human in the loop, right? So none of this data matters if there's not a person who can verify, yes, that's an opportunity we should go after. And there may be data that says it's an opportunity we should go after because 67% of the time when we go after opportunities like that, we win. And here's all the reasons why we win those opportunities. But I think human in the loop, whether it's, working with partners to have key client conversations with partners from various practices, they each know different things that they're not necessarily sharing, not because they're evil. They just don't, it doesn't occur to them that they should share the information with one another. But if BD marketing can act as that central hub and back it up with the quantifiable data, whether it's the internal, the external, or the combination thereof, that really is what drives data and turns data into intelligence and into actionable insights that you can actually use. And it sounds like a little bit, I aggressive maybe to target your clients that way, but it's actually just really thoughtful on behalf of the firm and really thoughtful on behalf of the client too, to recognize, hey, you have a problem. We know you like working with us, or we foresee a problem for you. We know you like working with us. Let's continue to expand this relationship in a way that's meaningful for both of us.
So as we are heading into 2026, what closing advice would you have to those that are listening at law firms who are recognizing the need and the challenges and the opportunity that capitalizing on their data along with third-party data presents for their firms? What would you lay out for them in terms of advice to move forward?
I think, really focusing on that change management and the culture change, because you can put in a lot of these ideas, but if you can't bring people with you, if you can't get not only your lawyers, but your colleagues and the other business professionals to come along on this journey with you, it'll be a very frustrating and lonely journey that does not bear the fruits that you are hoping for it to bear. That would be my first recommendation. And then the other recommendation would be unification. Whether you go the route of establishing a lake house, centralization, and, treat it as a hub, rather than, have all these separate little islands of products. Or, if that is not something that is within your firm's roadmap, doubling down and staying with a business partner, whether that is Intap or Nexel or Latera or, Lexis, whomever, but just commit to a partner and treat it as a central place, or go the path of creating a home of centralization for your organization.
I would echo all of that. And what I would add to it is, again, the human in the loop is super important.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say firms are making giant bets on AI. Firms and to be fair, on the other side, in-house departments are making giant bets on AI. And the only way you're going to see that investment pay off, and the only way that firms are going to see value in those AI workflows that they're creating, in the AI-enabled decision-making that they're bringing to bear, the only way you're going to get that actionable insight and that you're going to be able to grow top or bottom line revenue, whether it's, increasing your ability to get to market or decreasing the amount of time you spend getting there. Whichever way you look at it, the only way you're going to get there is if your AI is drawing from the best possible data. Mm-hmm. So have a human in the loop, but then also keep your data clean, keep your data structured. It's less sexy to invest in a data strategy than it is to invest in AI. But to make the most out of the AI investments, you do need to make that investment in your data strategy and in your data transformation. Yeah. That said, you don't need to do it alone. There are companies that can help you do it, but you need to do it, or none of the rest of it will make sense. And you'll feel the pain 3 and 6 and 12 months later when things aren't working the way you wanted them to work because the foundation wasn't there.
Thanks for listening to Legal Soundings. Subscribe for future episodes. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Harbor's work across law firms and corporate legal departments, visit harborglobal.com.